Hello, everyone. I'm Eric Curry, and welcome back to The Common Good. Here, we take time to reflect on leadership, service, justice, citizenship, and the responsibilities we owe to one another, not just in public life, but in our homes, our workplaces, our organizations, and our communities. Today, I want to talk about a kind of leader we do not talk about enough. Not the inspiring leader, not the charismatic leader, not the leader whose words lift a room, whose presence steadies a team, whose judgment brings clarity in the middle of uncertainty. We talk about these leaders often, and we should. We study their courage, we quote their wisdom, we remember their example, we point to their decisiveness, their humility, their discipline, their ability to bring people together and move in an organization forward. But there is another kind of leader we encounter in life: the counterproductive leader, the toxic leader, the leader who may have the title, the position, the authority, and the power, but lacks the self awareness, emotional discipline, or moral courage required to lead people well. And while we do not celebrate those leaders, we can still learn from them. In fact, some of the most powerful leadership lessons we receive in life do not come from the people we want to imitate. Sometimes they come from the people we are determined to not become. That is a hard lesson, but it is a necessary one because almost every person at some point in life will serve under a poor leader. You may find them in the military, you may find them in business, you may find them in politics, education, ministry, athletics, or community organizations. You name it, you will find them there. You may find them in places where the mission is noble, but the leadership, the climate, is unhealthy. And when you are living through that moment, it can feel heavy. Trust me, I know. It can feel personal. Trust me, I know. It can feel like you're walking through a narrow hallway with low ceilings, where every step is watched, every mistake is magnified, and every contribution is minimized. It can make even strong people question themselves. Am I really the problem? Am I not as capable as I thought? Am I being too sensitive? Am I losing my edge? And that is one of the dangers of poor leadership. It does not simply affect productivity, it affects confidence, it affects morale, it affects trust, it affects the way people see themselves and the way they see the organization they once believed in. A counterproductive leader does not merely fail to inspire, a counterproductive leader drains. They drain energy from the room. They drain initiative from the team. They drain trust from the institution. They create an environment where people stop offering ideas, not because they have nothing to contribute, but because they have learned that contribution is not always welcomed. And when that happens, organizations do not become stronger, they become quieter. People still show up, people still answer emails, they still attend the meetings, they still complete the tasks, but something essential begins to fade. That spark fades. The sense of ownership fades. The willingness to go beyond the minimum fades. And over time, the organization may still look functional from the outside, but on the inside, it's slowly losing its soul. That is why leadership matters. Leadership is not just about getting work done. Leadership is about creating the conditions where people can do meaningful work with dignity, clarity, purpose, and trust. A good leader understands that People are not machines. They are not merely names on a slide, numbers in a formation, or boxes on an organizational chart. They are human beings with families, burdens, ambitions, strengths, weaknesses, and potential. And a good leader knows how to correct without crushing. They know how to hold people accountable without humiliating them. They know how to demand excellence without stripping people of their humanity. A poor leader often confuses fear with respect. They believe silence means agreement. They believe compliance means loyalty. They believe their title and their position makes them right. They believe that because people obey them, people trust them. But obedience and trust are not the same thing. People may obey a toxic leader because they have to, because the system requires it, because the consequences of resistance are too high, because they have families to feed, careers to protect, and futures to consider. But trust is different. Trust cannot be ordered, trust cannot be demanded, trust cannot be inspected into existence. Trust is built slowly through consistency, fairness, competence, humility, and care. And once trust is broken, every decision becomes harder. Every message is questioned. Every correction feels like an attack. Every meeting becomes tense. Every success feels temporary because people are waiting for the next outburst, the next unfair judgment, the next moving target. That is what counterproductive leadership looks like. That is what counterproductive leadership does. It turns the workplace into a weather system. People spend more time reading the leader's mood than focusing on the mission. They ask, what version of this person are we getting today? They adjust their tone, their timing, their words, their posture, not to serve the mission better, but to avoid becoming the next target. That is not leadership. That is emotional instability dressed in authority. But here's the part we have to be careful with. When we talk about toxic leaders, we cannot allow ourselves to become consumed by bitterness. We cannot allow their poor example to become the excuse for our own decline. We cannot let a difficult season turn us into the very thing that we resent. Because poor leadership may shape the environment, but it does not have to define our character. You may not control the leader above you, but you still control the leader within you. You control your discipline. You control your preparation. You control the way you treat people who have less power than you. You control whether you pass the pain down or interrupt the cycle. That is where growth begins. Not when the situation becomes easy, not when the leader suddenly becomes fair, not when the organization finally recognizes what you have been carrying. Growth begins when you decide that even in a difficult environment, you will not surrender your standards. You will not surrender your integrity. You will not surrender your professionalism. You will not surrender your ability to learn. Because even poor leaders can teach us. They teach us what it feels like to be dismissed. So we learn to listen. They teach us what it feels like to be unfairly judged. So we learn to be fair. They teach us what it feels like to have our motives questioned. So we learn to seek understanding before accusation. They teach us what it feels like to be publicly criticized and privately ignored. So we learn to correct with dignity and praise with sincerity. They teach us what happens when ego outruns judgment. So we learn humility. They teach us what happens when a leader values control more than trust. So we learn empowerment. They teach us what happens when people are treated as disposable. So we learn stewardship. This is one of the greatest responsibilities of leadership, to remember what it felt like when you were under someone else's authority. Remember the leader who gave you room to grow. Remember the leader who saw potential in you before you fully saw it in yourself. Remember the leader who corrected you firmly but fairly. Remember the leader who protected you when it mattered. But also remember the leader who made the room smaller. Remember the leader who made you feel like your best was never enough. Remember the leader who used authority as a weapon instead of responsibility. Remember them not so you can remain angry, but so you can remain intentional. So you can say, when it is my turn to lead, I will not do that. That is maturity. That is discipline. That is how painful seasons become useful ones. But navigating a poor leader also requires wisdom. It is not enough to simply recognize toxicity. You have to learn how to move through it without losing yourself. First, stay professional. That sounds simple, I know, but it is not always easy. When you're dealing with a counterproductive leader, your emotions may be justified, your frustrations may be real, your disappointment may be earned, but your response still matters. Do not give a poor leader the opportunity to make your reaction the issue. Keep the records, know your responsibilities, meet your suspense dates, communicate clearly, remain respectful, do the work. Not because the leader deserves your best, but because your character does. Second, learn the difference between feedback and projection. Sometimes poor leaders offer valid feedback in a poor manner. Do not reject truth just because it came through a flawed messenger. It takes humility. Ask yourself, is there anything here I can use? Is there anything real, anything tangible that I can use? Is there a real area where I need to improve? Is there a gap I need to close? A habit I need to sharpen? A weakness I need to address? Take the lesson, leave the poison. That is important. Because if you reject every correction because you dislike the person giving it, you may miss an opportunity to grow. But if you absorb every criticism as truth, you may allow someone else's dysfunction to distort your identity. So be discerning. Take what is useful, discard what is unfair, and keep moving forward. Third, build a circle of wise counsel. Poor leadership can isolate people. It can make you feel like you are the only one seeing what you see, feeling what you feel, or carrying what you carry. That isolation can be dangerous. You need grounded people around you, not people who only feed your anger, not people who simply tell you what you want to hear. You need people who will tell you the truth, people who will help you separate emotion from fact, people who will remind you who you are, people who will challenge you to remain disciplined, even if or even when you are right to be frustrated. Every leader needs counsel. Every leader needs accountability. Every leader needs someone who can say, I understand why you feel that way, but do not let this moment pull you out of character. Fourth, protect the people within your influence. You may not be able to fix the entire organization. You may not be able to change the leader above you, but you can still influence the climate around you. You can still treat people with dignity. You can still explain the why. You can still communicate clearly. You can still give credit. You can still shield others from unnecessary chaos. You can still be the calm in the room, and that matters. Sometimes your leadership is not measured by how much authority you have. Sometimes it is measured by how much humanity you preserve in a difficult environment. That is service. That is stewardship. That is leadership under pressure. And fifth, do not allow a bad leader to make you cynical about leadership itself. This may be the most important point because toxic leaders do not only damage the present, they can damage your imagination for the future. They can make you believe that all leadership is politics, all authority is ego, all institutions are broken, and all effort is wasted. Do not let them have that kind of power over you. There are still good leaders. There are still honorable leaders. There are still men and women who lead with competence, courage, and humility. There are still leaders who understand that authority is not a trophy, it is a responsibility. There are still leaders who will pull up people, not push them down. There are still leaders who will hold the line without losing their soul. And if you have seen poor leadership, then perhaps you have been given a great opportunity, a great responsibility to become the opposite. Not perfect, none of us are perfect, but intentional, self aware, disciplined, fair. The kind of leader who remembers that people are not stepping stones for personal ambition. They are souls entrusted to your care for a season. That is how we should think about leadership, not as ownership, as stewardship. Because whenever you lead people, you are holding something fragile: their trust, their confidence, their willingness to try, their belief that effort still matters, their belief that the organization is worthy of their sacrifice. A poor leader mishandles those things. A good leader guards them. A great leader multiplies them. Now, let me be clear. This is not about encouraging disrespect. This is not about telling people to rebel against authority simply because leadership is hard or because correction is uncomfortable. Leadership often requires difficult conversations. Good leaders will challenge you. Good leaders will hold you accountable. Good leaders will tell you the truth, even when the truth is unpleasant. But there is a difference between hard leadership and harmful leadership. Hard leadership pushes you to excellence. Harmful leadership pushes you towards fear. Hard leadership corrects behavior, while harmful leadership attacks identity. Hard leadership builds capacity, and harmful leadership creates dependency. Hard leadership strengthens the team, and harmful leadership centers the leader. That distinction matters because not every leader who makes you uncomfortable is toxic. Sometimes discomfort is growth. Sometimes correction is love. Sometimes high standards are exactly what we need. But when leadership becomes consistently demeaning, erratic, self serving, dishonest, vindictive, or corrosive to the health of the team, then we have to call it what it is: counterproductive. And we have to learn from it, not so we can remain victims of it, but so we can rise above it. There's a quiet kind of victory in surviving poor leadership without becoming bitter. There is a quiet kind of victory in being underestimated and still preparing. There is a quiet kind of victory in being treated unfairly and still choosing fairness. There is a quiet kind of victory in walking through a difficult season and coming out more disciplined, more compassionate, more observant, and more committed to leading well. That kind of growth does not always make noise. It may not always come with applause. It may not be recognized in the moment, but it shapes you. It deepens you. It gives you a wider lens and a stronger spine. And one day, when someone else is looking to you for direction, you will remember what it felt like to be on the receiving end of a poor leader, of poor leadership. And you will have a choice: repeat the cycle or break it, pass down the pain or transform it into wisdom. Use authority to protect your ego or use authority to serve the people entrusted to you. That is the choice. That is the test. And that is the responsibility. So, if you're dealing with a poor leader right now, do not be discouraged by the moment. Do not let this season convince you that your work is meaningless, that your future is limited, or your character unseen. Stay steady, stay professional, stay prepared. Learn everything you can, document what you must, seek wise counsel, protect your spirit. And when your time comes to lead, remember this season with clarity, not with bitterness, with clarity. Because sometimes the leaders who fail us still form us. Sometimes the environments that test us still train us. Sometimes the people who show us what leadership should never be help us become exactly the kind of leader someone else will one day need. And that, too, is a part of the common good. I'm Eric Curry, and this has been The Common Good. If this message gave you something to think about, I invite you to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and join the conversation in the comments. Share your thoughts on what poor leadership has taught you, how you have grown through difficult seasons, or what qualities you believe every leader should protect. This channel is a space for serious reflection, respectful dialogue, and honest conversations about leadership, service, justice, citizenship, and public responsibility. And as always, the views expressed here are my own and do not represent the Department of Defense, the U.S. Army, or any official organization. Thank you for watching. Until next time, keep leading with discipline, dignity, and purpose, and keep working towards the common good.